Welcome to our unit on nutrition and the digestive system. And we've talked already about, so the things that we're going to go over in this chapter: introduction to the digestive system, so the anatomy part of it. We're going to talk about nutrition and energy production, that digestive system process, kind of how it works and all the specifics, and then how it maintains homeostasis or the regulation of that digestive system. Again, I'm going to go really fast because my video is going to limit me to 15 minutes. It's going to take you longer than 15 minutes to jot these notes down. All living organisms need nutrients to survive. We've talked about energy intake and so on before. Protein, fat, and carbohydrates are the main sources of food that we take in. Animals, like us, must convert these macromolecules into simpler molecules. As we break those down, we harvest energy from those molecules. That's actually how we power our bodies and even power our cells. Some challenges in human nutrition, and heaven knows I struggle with this: maintaining a balance between food intake and energy expenditure. And if those don't balance out, I'm either reducing my storage or I'm increasing my storage. And I can tell right now, this morning when I looked in the mirror, I'm definitely, I would say over the last, certainly over Easter weekend, I have increased my storage of some nutrients. And so I know I need to decrease the food intake and increase energy expenditures to burn up more of those calories. Main steps in the digestive process: ingestion, taking food in; digestion, how it's breaking down into those smaller units. How are we breaking the food down into something that can be used at the cellular level? That's really important. Movement, food must be moved along the gastrointestinal tract, that's what GI stands for, in order to fulfill all the functions of the body. And again, things happen at the cellular level first, and that's how our whole body gets powered. Absorption, movement of nutrients across that gastrointestinal tract. So when we eat food, how does it actually how do those molecules get broken down and then get into our cells so that they can be carried throughout the body? Because we talked already about in the circulatory system how our blood moves not just oxygen through our body, but all the nutrition through our body as well. And then elimination, how does it get expelled from the body? Pathways that it follows. Obviously food goes into the mouth, and we're going to talk about this physical, mechanical, chemical breakdown of food that occurs in the mouth. Pharynx is really just at the back of the throat. Esophagus is the tube that goes from the back of the throat down to the stomach. The stomach has hydrochloric acid in it, which is going to break down food, and it continues to break it down until it makes something called chyme, which really looks like kind of a cookie dough consistency. That gets pushed into the small intestine through a sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. Small intestines, this is where all of that nutrient absorption takes place, pretty much. And then as it moves through the large intestine, it's kind of done with the nutrient absorption part, but we're primarily concentrating on water absorption with the small intestine. Rectum, sometimes called colon, is kind of the last part of your digestive tract before it exits the body through the anus. And then, so as I kind of mentioned, digestion begins in the mouth. Sometimes we forget that. We think, oh, it goes to the stomach and that's where all the stuff happens. But nope, it really does begin in the mouth with both that physical breakdown through food mastication, and then moistened by saliva secreted from these salivary glands, which contains enzymes that really start to break down, especially starches, into glucose, but also starts to break down those fats. The tongue kind of helps move that around in the mouth, which is obviously important. And the resulting, we call it a bolus, when it's all chewed up and is moved to the esophagus by swallowing. you do have something, and I'm sure we'll mention it later, but there's a little flap in here called the epiglottis that when you swallow automatically goes over the tube that would normally take air into the lungs is covered by that epiglottis to make sure that food doesn't go into the airway. Sometimes, I don't know, it seems to malfunction a little bit, and then we talk about how, if you ever hear someone, or if you've ever had that experience of, it went down the wrong way, it went down the wrong pipe because for some reason that epiglottis just didn't do its job right at that point in time. So teeth begin that mechanical breakdown. Adults have 32 teeth. There's 20, we say, deciduous teeth in babies. Each tooth is made of a crown and a root, and that enamel is that outer covering. We hear a lot about how to preserve tooth enamel because that's the hardest part. So things that kind of work to break down enamel, which we get really concerned about, things like soda or sports drinks that are very acidic, can cause something called dental caries or cavities. Because they'll work to break that down. So if you're going to have a soda or a Gatorade or whatever, but don't sip on it all day long. That's really the worst thing you can do to your teeth because you're constantly flooding them with that acid solution. Kind of, if you're going to sip on it all day long, you just have that constant acid on your teeth. Just drink it and be done with it. And I know I, too, back in the day, enjoyed sipping on Diet Coke all day long. Really bad for your teeth. And I do have really bad teeth. Maybe that's part of why. Actually, pretty sure it's genetic. And genetics does have a lot to do with, some people are just really prone, and they have softer enamel, and they're just kind of a little more prone to cavities. I know growing up, had a sister who really as a child wasn't good about brushing or flossing, and I was just a fanatic about it, and she never had a cavity and I had like 20, so sometimes life's just not fair. We already kind of mentioned this a little bit, those salivary glands. Sometimes, I think it's kind of fascinating, sometimes when you think of certain foods, those salivary glands start to produce saliva before you even ingest any food. You just have to think about food. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. That happens if I think of especially like sour things. That kind of seems to start the process of producing saliva right away. Not sure why. Back in 10th grade biology, we did a lab with fake saliva, which really was just the amylase enzyme that I purchased dissolved in water. So it had just the enzyme part of the saliva. Tonsils, important in fighting disease. We say tonsils are actually part of that lymphatic system, but they do exist in the throat. One on each side kind of the throat where the food, where your food passes through. The tongue is really important in manipulating food. We talked about the formation of that bolus. But we also, those taste buds, which obviously in tasting our food, we don't all like the same foods because our taste buds are all a little bit different. And sometimes that's just what you've been exposed to is maybe what you like, but it also, there is a genetic component because there's certain genes. I know one of them, there's a gene that makes you taste cilantro in a certain way. And if you don't have that gene, I think that's the way it is. If you're lacking that gene, then cilantro tastes kind of like soap, and you really that's not a very palatable taste, and you really don't like cilantro. But if you have the gene for cilantro, then a lot of times, then you taste it how most people taste. Most people do taste it that way. I love cilantro. It does not taste like soap to me, so I know that genetically I must have that gene that allows me to taste that. I actually have some paper. We'll do a little test of one of the genes that allows you to taste. Some people to taste this certain chemical that tastes really sour, and other people can't taste it at all. So sometimes this can be very genetic. They say some people have a lot more taste buds and can be classified actually as super tasters because they have substantially more taste buds than the average person. So they tend to have a very sensitive palate, where, more so than most people. So the tongue, again, manipulates food, moves it toward the pharynx where it's going to be expelled from the mouth cavity. Swallowing of food. So you actually can swallow food while standing on your head because food does not move down your esophagus strictly by gravity. There's something called peristalsis, which is this wave-like action that actually carries that food down to the stomach. So that series of waves, that peristalsis, actually helps to move food from the mouth down to the stomach, where further digestive processes can occur. Pharynx, that cavity between the mouth and the esophagus, just serves as a passageway for food and for air. Esophagus, the tube, we kind of already talked about that. This is the same picture you had earlier. The stomach, now we are hardcore starting to break things down. This is a sac-like organ. We know that. It secretes gastric digestive juices. So there's enzymes like pepsin in there that help break down proteins. And HCl is that hydrochloric acid. You have a really strong hydrochloric acid. The pH is very low, between 1.5 and 2.5. That's very, very acidic. The only reason our stomach doesn't break itself down is because there's a lot of mucus lining the stomach that prevents that from happening. So this is a major site for protein digestion, especially. So there's 3 layers of muscle in the stomach. We have circular, longitudinal, and oblique. And there's actually deep folds in the mucosa has, we actually call it rugae, or deep folds in it as well. The chyme, we said this is that cookie dough consistency. Chyme from the stomach is emptied into the small intestine after about 2 to 6 hours. And again, there's a sphincter at the bottom that moves that into the small intestine. And just really quickly, so there's a sphincter at the top of the stomach where food comes in. We don't want that open. We want that closed, so those gastric juices don't bubble up and get into the esophagus. And then there's another sphincter at the bottom. This is that again only opens when we want to push things out of the stomach. This top one is actually the cardiac sphincter. The bottom one is called the pyloric sphincter. Small intestines, they're really, really long. They have a really big job. Okay, so as the food moves through, they have to make sure they can extract as much of that nutritional value as they can from the food. So about 18 feet in length. That's pretty long. Enzymes secreted by the pancreas into the small intestine help to break down things like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Bile, which is secreted by the gallbladder. It's made in the liver but concentrated in the gallbladder. That's used to emulsify fats, and digested food then is absorbed. Amino acids and sugar enter the capillaries, the very fine blood vessels. Fatty acids and glycerol enter the lacteals, or the small lymph vessels. We'll talk more about the villi that are contained in the small intestine tomorrow.